Well, it's that time of year. The time of year when people go out and they start setting fire to things and it's all right. And they start lighting the blue touch paper and hopefully standing well back. Because we've had some bonfires going around. The interesting thing about bonfires, but we maybe not go into that quite yet. But it's an interesting tradition that was co-opted by Mr. Fox's situation. So we're a small group tonight, a nice little huddle round the fire kind of thing, speaking around the bonfire. So let's introduce ourselves. We'll start with Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela, and I love working with people wherever they're at right now to help them to feel better, be better, and do better. So, whatever is stressing systems out, I help them to put down the baggage, clear the stress, and just feel less meh, basically. Oh, and I use kinesiology and coaching to do it.
Kills all the menace. Did I say that right? Mary.
I'm Mary. I'm a coach. I use coaching skills to support people who are mid-career who might have had the unfortunate experience of being made redundant, and I help them find the positive in it and find a new job, or a retirement plan, or a new business, or whatever else crosses our path in the process. And we generally have fun.
Hi there, I'm Willie, the retired cop turned coach, another coach, and I work with stressed out men to help them get their lives and their mojo back. So, proven solutions using NLP, hypnotherapy, and coaching.
And I'm Leslie Marsh. And I am interested in those little embers of the fire that you think it's out, but actually, if you give it enough of a little breeze, it will come back into life again. And it'll be amazing what you can do with that. So I'm looking at the culture of nurture. I'm looking at nurturing those little embers to make them into raging fires of wonderfulness. And fire is quite joyful and it has two sides, like everything. It can either be a great cleanser or a great destroyer. So, fire is also often attributed to passion and being passionate about things. You have fire in your belly, you're really interested in that. So, is that what we're looking for when we come to people, perhaps with their mojo, Willie? They've lost the fire in their belly and they need a little bit of a match or a little bit of, flint.
The word fire is very interesting. You could say many different connotations for it, but I would say, can you get fired up? Can you fire up your energy? Can you fire up your mojo? Um, Same as you turn the key in the ignition of your car, you fire up the engine. It's kind of making things go, motion, impetus, forward motion in particular. So I do like the word fire, and as you say, it can be destructive or can be very cleansing. Um, Fire up your imagination. So, or get fired up when my very short fuse decides to implode, which is not always a pretty sight. But yes, the word fire and its connotations, if used positively, can be a very good thing.
I've just had an image of you going off like a Catherine wheel, whirring all over the place. It's quite amazing. Mary.
I sometimes think that we talk about igniting the fire or lighting the fire to create the energy. And but what I have found most in reality, what I have used fire for is much more in that space of being letting things go. Because somewhere my primitive brain is very clear. If I've burned something, it's completely gone. So I would be one of those people when people have a lot of old stuff that they're holding on to for dear life and it's going in circles in their heads. I love to get them. Will you write it out? Let it have a start point and an end point. We'll stop it going in your heads. And then can you burn it? Nobody else has to see it. Just let it go. And it's amazing. For some, it works brilliantly. As it's that link between that primitive notion that when we burn something, it's gone. And that somehow they can make that connection. for themselves that, well, that issue is now gone. Now, it isn't, usually they will have done some work on it as well. It's not quite as, oh, just write it out and it's gone. It's not always quite that simple, but oftentimes if they're just holding on to it for dear life. So I do love that image of burning things and cleansing. And I have to say, when I'm working, that's more where I am than the igniting the fire in your belly piece. And I'm actually curious now because I'm there saying, yeah, when people to get excited about new jobs, new roles, new opportunities, I never use fire as an image. So I have some interesting work to do now.
Going on with that as well, when you've destroyed that thing that you've been holding on to for such a long time, it gives a space because nature loves a space to fill. So it gives a space to actually work on again, doesn't it, Angela?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's also that part of why do we only look at fire, or why do a lot of people only look at fire as a destructive force? There is that benefit. Yes, it's the space to then allow something else to go through. We do a lot of things with the Chinese five elements with fire and what water does to it, what it does to metal and things like that. So it's how it's all connected and interwoven. And I think there is that point that yes, there is the destructive elements to fire, but there's also massive rebirth and regrowth and benefits to fire. And at this time of year, sometimes it's putting the fire on.
Mm. It's also, as Mary said, it's a very ancient situation, and it goes way, way much further back than Guy Fawkes. It actually goes into the old Celtic tradition of burning the bones of the animals that wouldn't make it through the winter, and then putting those bones into the fields in order to fertilize the fields for the next year. So without the use of fire, that wouldn't happen. And it's interesting that what we look at as fire is got to do with how we see it as a power, how it influences us, and we, oh no, that's too hot for me. Don't go there. But also, it's true, we do ceremony with fire ceremony where we do actually have worked all day or all weekend. And then at the end of it, we write people's names down on a piece of paper, anybody or anything that's upset you in the last whenever, and it's all ceremonially burned. And this gives a release, like Mary says. Also, it's this physical release as well as the mental and emotional release, which when you join them together, fire is like a wee beastie that you have to feed. And you're feeding that stuff into the fire, but you're also changing it. You're transmorgifying it into something else, into smoke. It's going up in smoke. And isn't it amazing how, when we think about it, how much of the stuff that we carry around every day we could just put up in smoke? Safely, of course, and with the proper instruction. But it's true.
I think if you've things that are holding or have held you back, limiting beliefs or people or memories or whatever, there's a phrase we use, ink it, don't think it. Just don't think I'll get rid of that. So get a bit of paper, write it down, whatever it happens to be. Then metaphorically speaking, you're putting it out there, you're taking it out of here, putting it on that bit of paper, and then you set fire to it, and it destroys what you've written in the paper. And kind of metaphorically, you've just destroyed that bad memory, that limiting belief, which creates a space for something more positive. And it works, I've done it. I've written things down and say, right, ta-ta, you, I no longer need you, you've had a hold over me for too long, and I get my matches out, bang, there it goes. And there is a sense of release. And although people say, oh, really? Yeah, it works.
No, I believe that the energetic level of it is that by actually, and it's not just typing on a computer, although you can do it that way and then print it out, but the act of taking a pen or a pencil and writing on paper, the physical act means that your attention is flowing down and your universal mind is thinking, oh yeah, I've got to put that there, that moves that way to make that word, to write that name, to do this thing. And all of that is actually being sucked out into the pen and then dropped into the paper, actually pushed into the paper. And sometimes you'll find that you nearly go through the paper because the emotion that's attached to that. And it's really the emotion that's getting burnt away because the thing still happened, but it's how we emote to it and how we look at it that we're doing differently. But that's like journaling, isn't it, Angela?
Absolutely. And I think it's an interesting one with journaling that people feel as if they've got to write pages and pages and pages. You don't. You've just got to get that thought out of your head. Exactly as Willie said, put it on a bit of paper. Put it on, it doesn't have to be paper, it could be anything. But yeah, there is an energy to picking up some form of writing implement and writing something down and getting it out of your brain, out of your energy system to somewhere else. If you then choose to burn it, fantastic. If you then choose like a journal to then create a piece of artwork from it, or you just have a storage of shelves and shelves of journals over the years, it's still out of your head and you've moved that energy and you've shifted it. But it's about doing it in such a way that it's not a chore, because if it becomes a chore, then you don't shift the energy and you choose not to do it.
Yeah, it's still attached then. So, Mary, what do you think? You going to be lighting some fires?
Oh, I think we have to light a few fires. The phrase I've often used with clients has been, if it's in your head, it's going in circles. Because we use the phrase, it's going around in circles. And the very point of if you're writing it, there's a start point and an end point.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, and as soon as you write out, you half the time they'll see how illogical some of what they were thinking in their head was. That kind of does happen too. But I think it is that the fire has an energy, and I think, you know, I love making pictures. If you were to give me an open fire, I love, just sitting there daydreaming. Happy play. That is a happy spot for me, is sitting daydreaming in front of an open fire. Love it. So I think we have a lot of complex associations with the power of fire going back generations. So, like fire around the campfire, you referred to it earlier, Leslie. This idea of community and talking was around fire. Fire is very powerful in our mindset, going way back. So we do have that associations that are very complex and very rich.
Mm.
And we solve the problems of the world around the campfire, you know?
Yeah,
Of
All
definitely.
the
connection.
better with marshmallows
I knew
Well, I think
and hot chocolate.
they
Hot
came
chocolate
kind of
marshmallows.
later on.
Yeah, but so did I.
Well, you got it in there. There you go.
I, what is marshmallows and hot chocolate predate you, Leslie?
I don't
I don't
know.
think so.
I don't think they do.
It wasn't a dig at anyone's age on the call. It was more just you said it predates it.
It could do, though. It depends on what life we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's a
So
whole other
that's
story.
that's another story. But that is the
Yeah.
other thing that fire is very good at bringing out is storytelling, telling
Yeah.
stories around the fire. I mean, when we were first drawn to this element that suddenly arrived by lightning or some other thing that happened, and somebody somewhere thought, "Oh, I could do something with that," and it went from there. But after hunting, everybody would go around the fire and would relive the hunt and how it was done. And that's a way of processing how to do it better again, how to do that, how to succeed again. And I think that we tend to forget that we're not the first ones that thought about preloading our brains with the idea that if we think it, it will become something. I think that's what cave paintings are a lot about. Look, we did this. This is how it was done. There's a map.
The original graffiti.
You think sitting around the campfire, the kind of ancient cultures, that was how their history was recorded.
Yeah.
Sat around the campfire, they didn't have writing implements. So the only way they could record history was verbally, orally. So we sit around the campfire and they would basically recreate their history or retell their history to the next generation and so on and so forth. And it had to be done in such a manner that 10 generations down, the story was exactly the same. So they couldn't make a mistake. And when you look at around the camp, what do you get from the campfire? You get heat when it's cold. You get light. You get to scare the animals away. That hunt you've just had, you just take capture, and then you roast it in the fire. Right, so all of these, if you can imagine going back to the caveman days, think, you know what, this is really good stuff. Look at all the things we can do with it. Right? Until it then started being used for less pleasant purposes.
Yeah,
But I
it's a
think
great
that
cleanser.
yeah, I think that highlights just how powerful an element fire actually is. And I think a lot of us, and I would say a lot of people have come in contact with, we they don't connect in the same way with fire being one of the core elements. And yes, it is. If you ask them, yeah, oh yeah, of course there's fire. But we just take fire for, a lot of people take fire for granted as oh, it's a heat source or it's a source for, do some, burn things off. But we don't really realize just how powerful we can use fire for our own development, for our own sense of well-being. That it is a very powerful resource we can all call on, and it's easily available to all of us. Safely, of course, due to health and safety considerations taken into account. But we do, the idea, you know, I was sitting talking to somebody, and one of their requirements for their new home was, even though they were never going to light a fire, and that the fire was, it was, but they still wanted a fireplace with a location that they could use as a focal point. They were going to have colored lights. It wasn't even going to be a source of heat, but that we do connect to this idea of a flame in some way as something fundamental in our lives. And I think actually drawing that attention to, say, generations coming up about the elements is really important. And fire is a really easy one to translate. People, yeah, air is an element I needed to breathe. But then we don't realize, well, what's its power? But when we talk about fire, we understand really cleanly how it can be used for good, for bad, for this, for that, for the other. There's so many ways we use fire. And I think it is a powerful tool to teach people with in terms of making connections
Yeah,
and managing their own well-being.
And on
we're
that
kind
point though, most new build homes do not have fireplaces. They
yeah,
don't have
yeah.
chimneys, they don't have fireplaces. And I was looking at a
Yeah,
new build maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, and I says, "Where's the fire? There isn't one." So what's the focal point? Well, it'll be the TV.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
and so it is that point that yes, we say it's easy accessible, uh, but to do it safely, where do we now do build fires safely? Because you could live in a clean area that you're not supposed to set fire to things. You could have a new build home that doesn't have a fireplace. Gas hobs and cookers are no longer the commonplace as they once were. So you're now moving on to electric cookers. So unless you're lighting a candle somewhere, where is the standard focal point in the home for fire anymore?
Yeah, and this
It's not
this
the
this
kitchen or the living room.
removal, the removal of that as an individual element, as a primal element, is something that people who are being born into these generations, they don't have the experience of a coal fire or working with that or how to clean it and what ash is and the whole thing that's going on. The only thing they see ash
So
these
I
days is on the
wasn't
news, the
brought up,
volcano.
yeah, so I wasn't brought up with coal fires because by the time I was born, this location was a clean air location. You couldn't set fire to things.
Yeah.
So the coal fires did disappear unless you had whatever the clean burning alternative is. So most people switched from gas fires sorry, from coal fires to gas fires.
It's interesting as well that some of them have gone on to wood fire,
So
wood
that seems to
burners.
have that seems to be making a bit of a resurgence.
Mhm.
But new build homes don't have the ability for that because there's no chimney.
Yeah. So all in all, we've built ourselves, designed ourselves outside of the reality of nature in a way. And our heating and everything else is all technologically manifested. So nobody really knows where it comes from unless you really, really, really want to look. And that provides the idea that fire is a fearful thing.
On
So
that
many
note,
people.
that the fire could be used to instill fear. You remember, if you're a bad boy, you'll go to the big fire
Oh yeah,
Or
my
or the bad
goodness.
fire.
or the
Yeah.
bad fire,
Yeah.
right? Every depiction of hell
is a
is
fire.
flames, right, burning. You have it in art, like Dante's Inferno, where fire was a bad thing, and that's where you'd end up if you weren't a good person. So there's the analogy part of fire as well, as apart from the physical. We burn something and it gives off heat and light, whatever. It was used as a kind of, I don't know,
Yeah.
threat, if you like. You'll go to the bad fire if you're not a good boy. So fire in that respect became a cudgel with which to beat people to conform. And I mean, religion through time is you go to the bad fire if you're not a good person. The various religions said that you'll end up in hell or whatever the equivalent was in that religion, where inevitably there was fire because you have sinned or you haven't been a good person or whatever. So it's been used as a means of threatening people.
I just used to get the jaggy jersey home. If you don't behave, you go to the jaggy jersey home.
Which
Basically, a hair shirt. You don't know that, do
That's a
you?
new one on me. That is a new one on me. Never heard that one before.
Entirely Scottish, I think.
I think
So,
it must be.
you know,
But I do
those
think
woolen jumpers that you get that you have to wear a shirt underneath them because if you don't, you're like, ugh. Well, a long time ago, they used to upset themselves and scour themselves and do things by putting hair shirts on underneath their clothing so that they would always be in discomfort. It's a religious thing again. And it's like when they used to slack themselves with the little whip things, and I can't remember what it's called, but I don't really care. And
But I think there's something you brought up a really interesting point though earlier, and that was if we take the way the modern world is going, where we don't use fire as we don't have that connection to this element, what impact is it going to have?
Mm.
well, if the solar
Because we're
flares go
taking
the
one
way
of the
they're
core
going,
elements.
and
Yeah,
all of the electricity goes,
but actually, yeah, we are taking away a core element because in traditional homes now or new homes now, there is nothing that you set fire to because I'm sure probably people think candles are a bad thing as well, which is why they've now got electric
There's
burners
little
and things.
electric, and they've got these little things, imitation candles that don't actually have a real flame.
Yeah. So
Press them on and off.
if we take that and I actually work with a charity organization with young people and the kids between the age of 10 and 12 are allowed to set fires, obviously checked and watched. But when we become a senior at the age of 12, you're no longer allowed to set fires, which is a weird concept in itself. But it is that point that in the home, new homes, so yes, I've still got a gas fire, I've still got a gas cooker. I don't have any plans to get rid of either. Although the government might change my mind when they're getting rid of gas in your homes. Where is that ability now?
well, you look at the countries that still use coal-fired power stations,
Mhm.
polluting, not mentioning any countries by name, China, that use coal, an element, or I don't know what you call it, a chemical, whatever it is.
Carbon-based fossil fuel.
Fossil fuel.
Correct, right. And they use that to create energy to heat our
Mhm.
homes. So we've kind of cut out the middleman here, i.e. the flames, right? But we're using a substance to create power to heat our homes. The other thing that other countries are doing is nuclear power, or whatever it happens to be, but there's still a huge demand for coal-fired energy sources. So if you think, I can remember, and you might remember this, Leslie, when you were lighting a fire and you put a newspaper across the fire to create a kind of suction.
Draw.
For
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
to-
a
yeah.
draw.
And then having to be very careful the bloody paper didn't go on fire, right? In front of your face. And I also remember
Yeah.
when with newspapers, if folded in a particular way, acted as kind of firelighters.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You folded them very thinly, then you crossed them over, put them
Oh, I
in, you
love
set
doing
fire
that.
to them, and they burn very slowly, which meant that the coals would catch fire properly. I'm really showing my age off here. I can remember it very well. I
So I'll allow you that one because we did that with bonfires. So thinking about the time of year, we did actually get taught that as to how to build the bonfire.
my dad always did the paper thing, but I was the rolling up person. But we are creating energy, right? through the use of fire. We've talked about this. You get fired up and whatever it is. But I don't think we'll ever, well, maybe we'll ever lose the fascination, if you like, with fire. As you say, Mary, sitting maybe with a small refreshment in your hand, looking into the flames, chilling out, zoning out. It's very, very relaxing because it's a kind of mesmerizing thing, flames,
Yeah,
because they change
hypnotic.
colour, they change shape. And if you really let yourself go, maybe after too many refreshments, you start to see things in the fire, which can be very, very enlightening, if you like.
Half of
That's
my
why,
work depends on that, Willie.
well, that's why they have fire ceremonies, right?
Well, yeah, yeah.
And
And that's why we have the whole idea, and particularly in storytelling, of sitting around the storyteller's fire and having everybody gaze into the center of the fire. But the other thing that we have to remember also is that we are partly fire. And we have a thermostatic control that can go a little bit wonky, particularly in women of a certain age. But also when we get fevers, when we are not well, and we get this idea and we get very, flop sweats and the whole thing going on. So there's something burning inside of us that is a different manifestation of fire, of flame, but it is a heat source. We have to maintain a body heat. We have to take in fuel to maintain that. So just as we feed a fire on the outside, we have to feed the fire to bank it up or bank it down in ourselves, which then allows us to be more healthy and to look at the world in a different way. I mean, when you're feeling unwell and your fever is like, 100 or something, you're really not looking at things in a particularly good way. And the higher your fever gets, the more your thoughts don't work. Your brain just doesn't work. You can fry your brain quite easily. And so, with all of that going on, our judgment and our thinking process can be very upset by our own inner fire. How do we work that into understanding how fire would be beneficial in that department? Can we?
I still think the people talk about inner fire, having inner fire or inner energy or the will to succeed or whatever you want to call it, motivation. And obviously we don't have a physical fire inside us. We have a kind of metaphysical fire inside us. We have the will to push on, succeed at our tasks, and fire in the belly you talked about, Leslie. So that I go back to my point about the word fire, what you can use in a myriad of contexts. And you get fired up. I get fired up watching football, which is one of these things, right? But without that emotion, and people say I used to be accused of having a fiery temperament. Complete nonsense, of course. But there we are. Or people have fiery temperaments or a fiery temper or whatever. I think Irish people were accused of that, Mary. Having must do the Celtic.
Might occasionally have been assigned that. Right, all right.
But the
Redheads and redheads.
Redheads, yes, fiery redheads. Yeah. So anyway, fire, a great topic, myriad meanings and whatever. And we just tend to use it. He's fired up, or fired up the car, or fired up the kettle. How the hell do you fire up a kettle? I don't know, but plug
We
it in
used
or
to stick
whatever.
a gas flame underneath it.
Well, if you've got a gas cooker, fair enough. Fire up the kettle, let's have a cup of tea. So, like the back to the more kind of prosaic thing, yes, one of the elements. Where would we be without fire? Well, where would the old caveman be without fire? And its use progressively through the ages, mainly for beneficial things, but also for some unpleasant things like burning of witches and heretics and all that kind of malarkey.
Yeah. It is an interesting subject.
You've also got, if you're looking at the internals, so it's It's the heart that's associated with fire energy. And then you've got the, now I was on a training course a wee while back, or a webinar that was talking about, I think it was the gate of vitality. It's in your lower back, somewhere near your kidneys. And that's that fire energy that's in that space. And if you lose that or run out of that, you're on life support. So you need to have that energy in your system. So it's chi or whatever name that you follow and process with. But it is that point that we need to make sure we maintain that. And there's a lot of stuff as well. It says as long as you keep your lower back warm, you should be healthy. So I know myself when I've decided to be cheap and I've not put the fire on, I do have a little heating pad that I just put across my back. And I then don't feel cold anywhere else in my body. So there's interesting connections with all how that all works. But yeah, so it's the fire element is the heart, or the fire organ is the heart and the small intestine. But that's the one. And if you think about it, if your heart's not working, that's maybe where that spark is, your spark of life perhaps in the heart. Then things aren't working right if your heart's not working.
I think
I used to get,
the other side of that is if you that wonderful person, people get burnt out.
Mm.
And it's when they're drained and gone that somehow they're sapped of energy. So that we have very powerful language around fire, the fire element. That, like Willie's saying, about being fired up to do things, like being burnt out because we're exhausted. So we actually, in our language, all of our language, we use the fire element in very many different ways. And I'm curious because we don't use air in the same way. We don't use it as an adjective in the same way, I think. Now, you probably could go on to correct me on that. But I think as an
Let me see what
element,
I can think
fire
of.
has a power. I'm trying to think, and it's just my
It-
curiosity is going now at the minute, and I'm there. I can't make connections here.
Inspiration is
Inspire
about bringing
air.
to inspire, to take air in. And I think at one
Yeah.
point in Latin, it was inspirations linked to inspiritus, taking in spirit. So the air
Okay.
is the
Yeah.
life-giving
But we
part.
use fire an awful lot more
Yeah, we do.
in language.
So air's not one of the
What's that?
Chinese five elements, so I can't give you an answer from that perspective. But we do have, I suppose, earth and metal are the two that maybe aren't in the
You don't have
earth and
wind.
metal. Nope.
That's not a personal question.
No, so that the five elements are fire, earth, wood, water, and metal. Is the five elements in the Chinese?
Yeah.
It just occurred to me that if you didn't have air, you wouldn't have fire,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
True.
because oxygen is
Needs it.
required before the flames
Yeah.
go.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
But this is it though. Without any of them, without the other, doesn't really work. They don't work in isolation.
Nope.
Just like we don't work in isolation. And when we're out of balance, that's when the trouble starts. So there used to be when in Australia, when the settlers and the prisoners first went over there, then they didn't understand why the native people there would burn vast swathes of the land on purpose. And they stopped them from doing it. And now they're having fires that they can't actually control. They're starting to think about how it is that perhaps they were controlling something that way. By making it happen, they were stopping and making fire breaks for wildfires. And they're actually starting to look and research that now as well. But it's the way that people think about fire.
So I think it has been well researched. I think there's just not the funding necessarily there to have properly done the forest maintenance for a lot of these things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's amazing how it was being done naturally beforehand, and then suddenly it wasn't.
So how much do we lose when we start saying, well, you've got to do this instead? So if you look at the way society is moving forwards, and we've talked about homes no longer having fire, cars no longer have it as well. So if you're taking away the combustion engines and you're putting in electric engines, is there still a spark? Is it a different type of spark? What's going on? Because you're not burning and consuming in the same way that petrol and diesel cars did. So where else are we switching that over to something different? So what else could we possibly be losing? I don't know where I'm going with that. I just thought I'd throw it out there.
But
Yeah,
I think there's scope here because it's just our way the societal way of engaging with different elements is evolving. And I don't know if we're keeping up, which will cause problems and stress and trauma and people feeling meh.
Yeah.
If you take the example of an electric car, right? So there's no diesel, fuel, whatever it is. The electricity just appear out of nowhere,
I know.
right?
And
You'll have seen the cartoon where you've got an electric car being charged from a point where there's a diesel generator, right?
I've
Or
seen that one.
they've got
I don't believe that was a cartoon. I believe that actually happened when we had one of whichever summit it was about climate
oh,
control.
that's right. It was climate change. Something they had to charge the electric cars using diesel generators. Really,
Because they hadn't put enough generators in or charging points in.
the electricity's got to come from somewhere, and it will be generated by coal-fired power stations, nuclear power stations, whatever it is. Maybe even wind power, wave power, whatever. It's got to come from somewhere. So it's not the universal panacea for climate change that it's cracked up to be, because there's still pollutants to create the electricity to make the clean stuff.
Yeah.
And that seems to have been forgotten in the equation.
Conveniently.
Conveniently, of course, right? And whether when you look at the old steam trains, right, or Wallace's, whatever it was like wood burning, whatever it was, to create the steam to create the propulsion. And we've obviously moved on from there. But there will always be a need for some sort of energy production capability, whether it be fire or whether it be coal or whatever it is. And I think we'll probably still see fire about for quite some time to come.
I love the chuffer train. I did love the chuffer trains.
We still have them.
I saw the Flying Scotsman. It did a run on past my house when I was a little girl on its last run.
Oh no, wait, so you've still got the Thomas the Tank Engine train that does Christmas. You can go up and do that.
I don't do Thomas the Tank Engine.
So the Thomas the Tank Engine train is still a steam train, the steam engine, and it does trips for kids and for children and for families, and it's quite good fun. I've done it with my nephews, but it is a steam train.
That's the reason people have children. Okay.
Go on a steam train. Or they have nieces and nephews. Much easier. Wind them up
Yeah,
and
I
give
have
them
those
back.
as well, but they're not steam train age. So
And how do
they
we
could be
how
train
do we get the
spotters.
word you're fired?
Yeah,
Right, as in you no longer have a job.
because you get pulled a gun and you shot.
Or someone says, get him fired, right? Meaning not to make him redundant, make him get him away from here for whatever reason. So I'll go back to the point. In fact, you're fired. Who's the guy in the telly?
Alan Sugar.
Lord
Iron
Sugar.
sugar.
You're
Yeah.
fired. And where did that come from? You've lost your job. You're no longer good enough.
It used to be getting your books or your papers.
You're P45.
Yeah.
You're fired. There's another thing.
So another one from that then, from looking at other elements, you're washed up.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Wiped
I
out.
don't know if
Wipeout. That's a
wipeout tends to be
that's a
washed as
surfy
well,
thing.
isn't it?
Yeah, a wipeout. But you can wipe out fire with a big wave.
Mhm.
You can wipe out some fire with a little wave. But the interesting thing is that again, we're evolving faster than is for a lot of people the ability to keep up with it. The ability
And
to
it's only going to get faster. So if you look at the way things have evolved in the last 5-10 years, compared to how they evolved over maybe the 20 or 30 years before that, and technological advancements and everything else that's going on right now, it's just going to keep getting faster.
and we can't
I
keep
think
up with
we
it.
read a book about that in January, didn't we, Mary? There's a section around the fact how quickly things are and the amount of change we might see ourselves in the next 5 years. 10-year-olds behind us are going to see that amount of change in 2 years,
2 years.
or in 1 year when they get to our age, and it is phenomenal.
I think that, there's it's the rate of change is exponential rather than linear.
Yes,
So
that's the
it's
word I was looking for. Thank you.
but and you see, I think, and my curiosity is around when we haven't got that close connection to the elements, what impact will it have on people? And do we need to keep pulling people back and reminding them of the importance of the fundamental elements and draw those connections and help them draw those connections so that they can stay a little bit in feeling in control? Whether or not they are is a different story, but they can feel in control.
You used the right word there, curiosity, because it's
Yeah.
curiosity that actually makes the neuroplasticity work in the brain. And
Yeah.
the more that we sample the same things and we scroll the same cat videos and funny things and all the rest of it, and the less we're interested in what's going on outside of that little screen or the big one in the corner of the room, the focal point these days, the less actual brain we need to use. And it has been shown that the brain is winding down. In a lot of people, they're getting smaller because they don't need them anymore. They don't need that plasticity. And part of that plasticity is firing up curiosity, is understanding that there's, oh, what's that over there? What can I learn about that? Maybe I should talk to that one. And we're losing our sociability as well. We're losing communication in one way and gaining it in another way. Language is shifting so fast too. I mean, thinking about how we used to, how they used to spell things like housewife. I mean, there were two V's instead of a W, and the S's looked like F's. And you're looking at these ancient languages, and we think about how language has gone, how spelling particularly has gone as well. We're having to keep that up. We're having to do things like that. And while we're racing to keep up, it's like somebody stuck a rocket up our backsides and lit the blue touch paper. We just seem to be going whoosh that way.
So I'm
But
going to challenge a little bit on these cat videos and funny things. There is also a lot of other content out there that you can learn things from, and it's about choosing what information is coming at you.
yes,
And I would say as well that actually, with what's going on in the world and the news now, I'd much rather be watching I'll not say cat videos because that's not me. I'll go for dog videos. I'd much rather be watching the comedy and the fun than watching the news. But again, I'll also watch the videos on ancient civilizations, and somebody's got this little two minute or 5 minute clip about an ancient civilization and something they've learned. So there's ways of doing it
yeah.
as long as you keep yourself focused on, I want to keep learning.
And is that going to be the next generation's ultimate goal?
To keep learning?
Mm-hmm.
I would hope so.
When all they have to do is be fed the same stuff all the time?
Again, it's whether you're choosing to be fed the same stuff or you're going looking for other content. Like
Yeah.
us. You come like us.
Yes, like us. We're curiously not talking about therapy at the moment, but there you go.
We're probably too long for the latest style of content, but that's
Yeah,
fine.
it's like half a second now, isn't it?
That's okay.
A bit longer than that.
That's about as long as I can stand it. Most of it. Half a second. Okay, so we need fire. We need to understand fire. We have to really look at nature to see where fire comes from. It's a natural source, and it's a source that we have resourced throughout the years. How we change that around, because you mentioned nuclear stuff, Willie, that is the ultimate fire. Because that is going to just burn everything. And the ashes of that are bye-bye.
Only if
So,
it's for destructive purposes.
Yeah, only if it's not controlled right.
If it's controlled properly,
Right.
it's a very inexpensive and everlasting
yeah,
source.
but it's one of those things like you said about the diesel generator for the electric car. Uranium deposits. Where do we put the waste from the nuclear?
Every option has a downside.
Exactamundo. And changing the name of the place it comes from is not going to make it go away, as we know. So, when we think about it, it would be really, really good for our well-being mental, physical, emotional, to understand more about the elements that we're working with on a daily basis and the ones that we don't. Because we're working with something that actually comes from something else. It evolved from something else too. So perhaps we have to look at sources to help us to understand where we are in the world, how we can negotiate the world, and what's going to happen, and how we can face burnout, how we can inspire ourselves to lighten ourselves up and put a match to things and see what happens. Burn the stuff away. And let's face it, surgeons use cautery, which is a wee fire that burns the blood vessels to stop them from bleeding while they're going in having a guddle. So it happens all the time. Maybe we should respect it a little bit more and keep that focal point in the room as a fireplace, because you can't really hang a Christmas stocking up on a telly, can you?
Yeah, there's possibilities.
Well, yeah, there's anything. Yeah, well, sometimes what's on telly you need to. So anyway, I think we've come to the end. We're going to blow out the flame. We're going to douse the fire. And then we're going to take the ashes and we're going to put them somewhere safely where they won't harm anybody. And we'll see you next time.